Kenny said he had something to show us. That's something you don't say no to. It started off tame when we were kids. Kenny would always be the first to find a decent roadkill. Usually a deer, but sometimes gold was struck in the form of a coyote or a wolf, and one gnarly encounter with a gutted cougar. Then it was porn stashes. Hustlers hidden in bushes behind the high school. His dad's secret video collection, hidden in the topmost corner of his parents' closet. As we grew taller, so too did our bar for entertainment. Once Kenny found a teepee randomly placed in an aspen grove. That in itself is nothing strange, until you peeked inside and saw the dead body. It reeked something fierce, but it blew our freshman minds just the same. He was dressed in a ragged t-shirt and jeans, both stained with age and dirt. A horde of flies had collected within the dinky space. Stacy poked him with a stick, and when rotted nerves delivered one final twitch of his left arm, Ashley screamed, and we all sped through the woods and back into the city limits where we collapsed, laughing uncontrollably. Now we were seniors. Graduation was a month away. We were ready for something awesome. So when we met Kenny one Friday night at Fish and Chips, Greg spoke for all of us when he said, "This better be good, roadkill." "It's fucking spectacular." Kenny's eyes glazed over, and his smile briefly flashed a resemblance to the Exorcist chick. Maybe this should have scared us. Maybe it did. Regardless, we left the smell of frozen fish and followed Kenny into the night. Mark Street was west of the river. The other side of the tracks, I think, is the old term. Of course, in our town, that just meant slightly more homeless and not as much welfare. This end of suburbia was sparsely populated with houses even the tramps would turn down, most of which displayed no signs of life. We passed beneath a dead street lamp, a litter of glass scattered at its base. Luckily, the moon was full and cast a gloomy but impressive light on the deserted street. Greg pulled a plastic baggie from his jeans and produced a doobie, hastily rolled and generously packed. As he blazed up, it resembled a shriveled old man's cock hanging limp between his lips. The end seared a bright red, and he exhaled plumes of coiling smoke. "I have a feeling we'll need it," he said, offering the dick to me. I took it gladly and relished what I could from the hit, before wheezing and sputtering. "Shoot your dealer," I said, through a billowing cloud of what I assumed was primarily pine needles. I offered Ashley a hit. She shook her head slowly and wiped at her nose, pretending to be put off by the smell. We continued on our way. A bum emerged, flailing from a nearby bush, and accosted Ashley, singing something about pigs. She screamed. Kenny gripped the black backpack he carried like a baseball bat and swung it into the man's face. The sound echoed up and down the street as he hit the cracking pavement. His singing turned to horrendous curses as the five of us took off, laughing and hooting at our ill-gotten victory. I almost rolled my ankle in a pothole, and my heart rapped at my ribs like money was owed, but I grinned so wide my face hurt. A soft wind blew bits of trash across the street and rustled the remaining dead leaves in the naked trees as Kenny finally brought us to a large, 2-story Victorian house. It seemed oddly out of place at first, but it didn't take long to see the hastily boarded windows, the cracking walkway, or the porch that seemed to have imploded. The paint peeled away like dead skin, much of which layered the mounds of dead leaves and black earth that seemed to envelop the foundation's base. The collapsing roof cut a looming silhouette against the brightly lit clouds. I watched skeletal hands of dead tree limbs sway softly, sensuously in the backdrop, and I found myself licking my upper lip in unease. I blamed it on the haze. Kenny unzipped his backpack and passed out a mismatched assortment of flashlights, assumedly what he could scrounge up from his house. Mine was pink. Princess Ariel smiled up at me from just left of the button. I smirked. Kenny's little sister was a big Disney freak. Kenny glided across the crumbling remains of what once must have been a walkway and hopped up the creaking steps to the porch. As I followed the procession, I heard from behind a sharp but diminutive, "Oh, crud." I turned. Ashley stood like a statue, gazing up at the shattered house with quivering eyes. Her flashlight drummed spastically against her thigh, and her free hand rubbed at her bicep as if she shivered in the warm summer air. Across her chest, the bright red letters D-A-R-E wrinkled and scrunched together, as if they were just as terrified. "You can wait here, Ash," I told her confidently, and under my breath so no one else would hear. What can I say? Chivalry may take long vacations, but it's not dead. She looked at me and her eyes seemed relieved to be drawn away from the house. She rubbed the back of her neck, giving her wavy brown hair a flutter, before her eyes blinked her back to the present. "I'm good." "Good and true?" I asked, eyebrow arching. She managed to smile. "Good and true." Kenny yanked out 2 loose boards and laid them against the rusty skeleton of a lawn chair. The frame of the front door was so badly splintered and worn it creaked open from the wind alone. "I found this place 2 nights ago," Kenny explained as we entered, our lights stabbing this way and that way through the dark. "Someday we have to talk about your off time," Greg stated flatly, his light illuminating a large, crooked portrait of an old broad with a razor-line mouth and baleful eyes. Paint from its surface had long since chipped away, and a horde of spiderwebs decorated much of the frame. A snarling groan escaped Stacy as her light revealed what looked like a lamp cocooned in layers of thick web and crawling with fat black spiders. Her throat vibrated with a coarse growl before hawking a loogie onto one of the crawlies, his legs flailing madly as the saliva encased him. She turned away, satisfied. We entered the living room, our sneakers setting off a crescendo of creaks and moans that rang out like a thunderstorm in the crumbling house. The blazing moonlight streaking through the cracks in the boards gave some faint illumination to the scene, and our flashlights compensated for the remaining darkness. The most prominent figure in the room was one of those half-couch love-seat things. It must have been red at one time, but the fabric had faded to an ugly pink. A long slash began at the top and ran down to the cushion, expelling a long line of yellowing stuffing. On the far wall was the remnants of a splintered shelf that had spilled its contents upon the carpet an age ago. Books and torn pages scattered across the floor. Against the right wall stood a bookcase, its glass doors shattered, books and scrolls lying in a pile before it as though it had caught flu and vomited up its contents. Beneath the bay windows to the left stood a wide hope chest as delicately embroidered and decorated as the Ark from Raiders, save for the long, claw-like dents radiating around the wood in random patterns. "Someone got raped here, didn't they?" Stacy groaned with more disappointment than disgust. "Yeah, probably," Kenny returned. "Dude," Greg said, moving his light from one end of the room to the other in a slow arc. "Snore City." "Seriously," Stacy said, taking the doobie from Greg's mouth and hitting it like a gangster. But Kenny strode confidently into the room and shone his light onto a large black spot on the floor. "Despair not, friends. Check this out." Upon flooding the space with all our lights, we saw that it was no spot, but a hole in the floor. About 10 feet down we could see the marbled stone floor of a wet basement, cat-sized rats scurrying from the light. The hole was a strange shape and size, with a large main body and 4 projectiles protruding away as if... "It's a person," Ashley finally breathed. It was indeed the vague outline of a body, like one of those cartoons when someone's so frightened they run through a wall and leave a perfect outline of themselves. But there was no detailed outline here. The edge of the carpet was frayed, ragged, and blackened. The timber framing beneath was not splintered as though something of great force had dropped through, but rather worn smooth and blackened into soot. "Are those burns?" Greg asked. Kenny's face became grave. "Now you know. There's a xenomorph somewhere in the house." They both laughed like it was the best thing in the world and shared a high five. Stacy turned away with a roll of her eyes. Geeks. Stacy took one last hit from the shriveled cock, then handed it to Ashley. Ashley gazed down at the smoldering limp, then back at her surroundings, taking in every ounce of unnerving detail the room had to give. She turned back to Stacy, who had not wavered even slightly. Ashley's face was firm and resolute, though her lower lips tightened as she grabbed the joint and took a drag, her eyes again patrolling the darkness around us as she wheezed. Kevin looked back at us with a glint that almost rivaled our flashlights. "This is just the appetizer. Hold on to your butts and follow me," he said, as he stepped over the mess of shredded books and through a doorway. The actual door lay splintered against the adjacent wall, only still attached at the bottom hinges. "Gladly," Greg said, giving Stacy a firm slap on her behind. She let out a shrill, girlish hoot and wiggled her hips like silly putty. The good-natured excitement shriveled to dust as we entered the next room, however. It seemed to be some sort of shrine or bizarre place of prayer. Large tapestries adorned the walls, each sporting mazes of complex symbols and alien text, and all looked as though they'd been attacked with a knife. A shelf that once adorned the right wall was splintered in two, and a scatter of strange objects and freakishly distorted statuettes littered the tattered carpet. Shriveled, ribboned, and flung into a corner was a ceremonial robe with colors and symbology that matched the tapestries, along with several large splotches of black stains. At the head of the room, a tall, marble pedestal resembling a host of twisted snakes had been knocked over, and a huge book lay open upon the floor. The pages were yellow, and tattered. A dizzying haze of intricate, otherworldly text danced before my eyes. I heaved the book over, and it slammed shut with a force that vibrated the room and expelled a cough of dust into the air. I guess I expected to see a pentagram or some such thing stamped onto the leather binding, but the cover was bare and decorated only with 4 long slashes running crookedly and deeply across the material. The only untouched object in the room was a black, 3-foot-tall statue standing upon a small table in the corner. It portrayed a ridiculously curvaceous naked lady who posed delicately as a horribly misshapen tendril made of writhing corpses and screaming faces twisted and coiled around her, ending in a hideous, snarling head, like a dinosaur mated with an insect. Greg stood staring at the statue through a glaze of weed and hard-on fuel. "God damn," he breathed. "Chick makes Cindy Crawford look like a rape child of It's Pat and Power Rangers monster." Stacy sauntered over, a dark gleam in her eye, but upon seeing the statue she proclaimed, "Jesus, even I'd fuck that." A short exclamation of noise spat forth from Greg. It was difficult to decipher it as a confirmation or his own jealous pout. He reached out to touch the statue and yanked back his hand so fiercely I heard his wrist pop. "Jesus, faggot fucking Christ," he hissed. "Thing's freezing." He managed an unsteady laugh, studying the end of his index finger. "Aw, big linebacker can't touch a naked lady," Stacy teased, fingers dancing at him like tendrils, which he swatted at, laughing. Ashley stood closest to the door as she stared morosely at a long black stain of something that had splattered across the cracking wallpaper ages ago. A long plume of smoke spat from her mouth and dissipated slowly into the heavy air. "Guys, we need to leave." And wrapped in Ashley's timid nature, it sounded more like a question. "Are the boogeymen on their way, Ash?" Stacy taunted in a cackling old lady voice. Greg laughed. "Guys, I mean it. Something's still here." "Chill out, Ash. No ghost's gonna get you while we're around." Greg then turned his head upward and hollered, "You hear that, deadites? None of you dipshits better fuck with our little friend." Before I could look away, he had dropped his drawers and was smacking his bare ass like a drum. "Kiss this, you faggy demons!" Stacy gave yet another shrill holler of prepubescent hormones, mating furiously with the buzz, and gave the cheek a firm slap herself. Everyone was laughing at this point. Even I cracked a smile. Again, I tried to blame the haze, and again, I knew it was bull. Regret instantly fought through the weed, and even the pine needles, the moment I saw Ashley's face. She was not only not laughing, but seemed on the verge of tears. She stood placidly, hugging herself, and staring at the floor, her eyeballs wobbling like a frightened child. I love Ashley and blibbity bing bang, but if ever they had a room for a photograph in the dictionary next to the word killjoy. Ashley flicked the stubby remnants of the shriveled joint to the floor where it shone like a dying star before smashing it with her sneaker, her face now twisted in anger. Greg hollered as if in pain. "The fuck, Ashley? You don't zip up a dick when it's still got that much length?" Ashley's eyes squinted in confusion at the strange metaphor. Realization hit quickly, however, and her face morphed back into a little girl on her first day of school. "Oh, sorry." She hugged her gut as if she would be sick. Truthfully, she was just trying to hide herself from the world. "Smooth move, sweetie," Stacy said, venom lapping from her tongue. Ashley sucked in her lips so her mouth became a straight, undefined line. Her eyes refused to pick up from the floor. They scanned it ravenously, as if she'd lost something. Kenny grabbed the tattered remnants of the left tapestry and yanked it away, revealing a black door. 2 large holes had been punctured through its lower half, shards of dark wood splintering outwards, as if Steve Austin had put his fist through in an attempt to break out. Kenny rested his hand upon the knob and turned back to us with that mad glint. "Ladies and gentlemen, the coup de grace of my brilliant discoveries. Kablam!" he proclaimed as he yanked open the door. The first thing that hit us was a wave of pungent air, a smell like a corpse that had gone sweet rather than rotten. Goosebumps radiated up and down my skin, and I would have scratched at them had the eerie purple light from inside not held me entranced. We filed in one by one. The room was smaller even than the last, no more than a storage room with almost nothing stored. The walls were bare save for peeling wallpaper, the floorboards deprived of even dust. And hanging in midair in the center of the room was a swirling kaleidoscope of purple color. It was something out of the X-Files, about the size of a beach ball. It was like a hole in the air that radiated with fluctuating blobs of black, contrasted by a cold purple glow that brightened as it neared the center. It was beautiful to look at. My haze, weak as it was, evaporated like steam and left me with a wondrous euphoria I'd never known before or since. I lost myself in the swirling purples. If Stacy hadn't spoken first, I think I'd still be there, staring into it. "It's beautiful." Her breath left her as she spoke. Her hand slowly floated toward the thing, though she reconsidered just in time. "Walk around it," Kenny said, the smile never leaving his face. We did so. The more we curved around it, the flatter it became. It was as if it were being projected onto a piece of glass. In fact, as I stood directly to its left, it appeared to be nothing more than a long, black line quivering in space. I moved an inch to my right. It was gone. I moved behind it. Still nothing. All I could see was Kenny's beaming face, although it was aglow in an eerie purple light with no visible source. He put his thumbs to his ears, wiggled his fingers, and lapped his tongue about like a deranged moose. "Can you see me?" he asked. "Tight," I breathed. I moved back to the front, my back never leaving the wall, as I wanted to give the unseen thing a respectable berth. It came back into view like a page being turned, reaching its full width as I came to the front. Greg turned off his flashlight and tossed it into the thing from behind. It came through like it had passed through a splinter of light and clanked harmlessly to the floorboards. "Jesus!" Stacy breathed, hand on her heart and staring down at the flashlight like it had turned into snakes. "Jizz face?" Kenny's smile only widened. "Things can only enter from the front." "Enter?" I had to mouth the word several times before it came out. Kenny let his backpack flop to the floor. From it, he removed a tennis ball. He presented it like a magician, as if he were putting on some sort of act. I guess to him he was. He tossed the ball as hard as he could into the spiraling mass. The light flared, and the black clouds rippled violently upon contact, and the ball vanished. Stacy let out a shrill but short shriek, and we all stared, transfixed. All but Kenny, who stood patiently, hands clasped behind his back. For 10 minutes, nobody moved. Then the blacks quaked. The purple light pulsated, and the tennis ball arced outward as if it had been tossed by a toddler, bounced several times on the hardwood, and came to a rest before Kenny. With his index finger and thumb, he picked it up, and once again presented it. It was layered in a black goo that hung down in thick strands and dangled like saliva. "Pretty cool, huh?" Kenny's eyes were wide with a sadistic glee. "It's a wormhole," I said, once again nearly lost in the swirling vortex. Kenny's smile faded. "Huh?" "It's like a doorway between two distant places. I read about them in physics. The theory is that space pinches together, creating shortcut tunnels from one place to another, maybe even linking to other planes of existence." Ashley continued to circle around the thing, wide eyes captivated and unblinking. What causes it?" I shrugged. "Echoes of the Big Bang? God belching? Chanting weird voodoo curses?" I jerked my thumb towards the last room. "Everything I just told you is totally all I know." "Why can't we see it from behind?" Greg wondered out loud. "Dude, what did I just say?" Stacy pulled out a quarter and flicked it into the portal, if that's even what it was. A sharp flicker, and it was gone. Seconds later it emerged, flying toward her. She squealed in surprise, but her reflexes rewarded her with a clumsy catch, and she held the coin in her palm with a reverence I've only seen her give bottles of makeup. "Killer," she said with a grin, and undaunted by the thin line of slime that dripped from her hand. "What do you think's on the other side?" Kenny's wild, toothy smile returned, and from the backpack he fished out his father's sharp ViewCam camcorder, the kind with the wide-color view screen. "Now we can find out." Tension grabbed at my spine as I watched Kenny pop in a fresh tape, then tie a long cord around the camcorder. He was taking no chances. If you'd met his dad, you wouldn't either. I helped him secure the knot. I'd been a Boy Scout for 2 years. He turned it on, hit the big red record button, and gently tossed it into the hole. I'm not sure what I expected. Maybe for the cord to be yanked from his hands, maybe for the force to pull him in. I didn't care for either scenario, but I stifled the voice of reason that yammered on and on in the back of my mind, simply because I wanted to see. God help me, I wanted to see whatever was going to happen. A quick glance at my friends told me they were thinking the same. What I didn't expect was that almost a minute later, the camcorder fell from the hole and banged loudly against the floorboards. 5 surprised but tense faces stared at it for almost a minute. A small puddle of sticky black slowly radiated from it. It landed closest to Ashley. She stared at it for a few moments before slowly bending down to pick it up. She wiped away a thin membrane of gooiness that plopped to the floor in a long strand. The bright blue view screen illuminated her face, her stiff lip, her calm eyes. There was a soft whirring noise as she hit rewind, and her eyes squinted strangely. "It's counting down from 90, she said flatly. Kenny looked at me, bafflement slapped across his long face. "It was hardly in there a minute. How'd it catch an hour and a half of footage?" I shrugged, not sure what knowledge he expected from me. Kenny bit his lip. Stretching his hand toward Ashley, he proclaimed, "Let's see, Ash." Ashley's hand outstretched to meet Kenny's. Then her eyes quivered, and she slowly brought the camcorder back, holding it like she was keeping a bottle of pills from a toddler. Slime engulfed her hand and began to drip down her arm. "Why?" she asked. "You don't think I can handle what's on here?" "No one said that, Ash," I stated as flatly as I thought necessary. Her eyes seemed to stare through me. They glinted in the purple light emitting from the hole that continued to swirl on, apathetic to our every whim. "You don't have to. It's what you think. It's what you all think." Her stare droned over each and every one of us, her face suddenly mirroring the vacuous dispassion of the portal. She backed away from us till she found the corner of the room and nestled there. Her wavy hair shook loose from her shoulder and blanketed one eye, as if protecting her from our puzzled stares. Ashley the bashful, Ashley the humdrum, Ashley the always comfortable, the Ash who believes in spirits and collects oriental trinkets, Ash who believed in Santa until she was 12, Ash who's never kissed a boy. Her voice squeaked and her hand flew to her mouth. Even in the purple glow I could see the blush. But when her hand took its time drawing away, her face was firm. The one eye that showed gleamed with a dangerous passion as she stared at us through the misty edge of the vortex that bent and distorted the light behind it like a funhouse mirror. A soft, robotic moan emitted from the camcorder as the rewind process finished. Ashley's eyes snapped down to it in surprise, but when they sprang back up, they were glazed with a resentment I'd never seen in her. "I'll show you." She whispered it so low I had to read her lips. Then she stated louder, "I'll show you all up right now." She brought the view screen up to her face, and I caught the faintest glint of malice shining in the black void of her pupils before she whirled around to huddle in her little corner. We heard the tape hum to life as she pressed play. I looked at the others. They appeared dazed but unsurprised. Kenny shrugged, his eyes tired. Stacy's hands rested on her hips, and she rolled her eyes, giving a small exhalation of disgust. Greg blazed up a fresh doobie. The volume on the camcorder was not at its height. Noise bounced lazily off the empty walls and eventually struck our ears, but it was a soft, inaudible whisper. Soft, squishing sounds. Some scraping. More sloshing. Was that a scream? Was that another? Hardly 30 seconds went by before Ashley sent the camcorder smashing into the floorboards. Several splinters of plastic flew from the gadget before it bounced to a heavy halt. "The fuck, Ashley?" was what I believed Kenny meant to say, but he barely got past fuck before Ashley's piercing screams echoed in that tiny closet. Long, horrid, throaty screams like an animal was being tortured. She flew from her corner and barreled through the back of the hole. I caught a glimpse of wild, red eyes and a gaping mouth before she shot past me into the shrine. We nearly ended up a pile of squirming bodies as the 4 of us stampeded after her through the narrow doorway. Ashley's screams now had a bigger space to congregate in, but that somehow intensified their guttural resonance. Ashley had thrown herself before the busty statue, her stiff hands held out imploringly. "Don't take me," she screamed at it. "Please, please don't. I'll do whatever you want. I'll do anything." Her screams became desperate, panicked pleas. She gripped the statue's base and jammed puckered lips against the woman's feet, heaving sobs sending violent quakes up and down her crouched body. "Ash!" Greg yelled. He gripped her left arm, and I instinctively grabbed her right. We ripped her from the statue, and immediately the screaming continued. Its piercing escalated, and her legs thrashed about in a violent torrent. She threw her head back, and her jaw stretched in a glass-shattering howl, whose reverberation felt as if ceiling tiles were falling. That's when I noticed the blood dripping down her bottom lip, and staining her bared teeth. A quick glance back at that horrible statue sent chills quivering through my bones as I realized the skin from her lips and much of her hands had remained on the thing. I didn't have time to feel terror. Repenting was not on the table as Ashley lashed out of our grasps and flung herself against the wall, running her nails down the wallpaper like a possessed cat, leaving new claw marks, streaks of bloody handprints, and some fresh nails. "Don't let her take me!" she screamed as she attacked the walls. "She'll want more! She wants so much more!" I grabbed her arm, but her free one swung about and clawed my face. I fell to the floor, tasting fresh blood. I caught sight of Stacy and Kenny. They stood there like mannequins, staring at the unfolding scene like they were missing popcorn and overpriced sodas. Ashley had gone back to the wall, but now Greg had her in a bear hug and was dragging her backward. Her screaming and kicking never ceased. Her face was... I didn't even recognize her. Her skin had gone pale except for around her eyes, which had turned a dark gray. Wrinkles set in as though she hadn't slept for weeks. Her eyes were red and bloodshot, her pupils black and enlarged. Tears streaked her cheeks. Snot drained from her nose, and bile leaked from her mouth. Her screams became higher, banshee-pitched as she implored the ceiling. "Chop me up! Chop me up into little chunks and scatter me! They can't get me if I'm scattered! Burn me! Oh, please, God, burn me!" She raised her forearm to her mouth and bit. Hard. Blood gushed and splattered her face. A black river poured down Greg's squeezing arms and splattered the carpet with heavy drops. "Ash, stop! Ash!" I screamed at her. Her eyes looked through me, like a wild beast. They glistened with a primitivity I'd only seen in zoos and nature shows. She bit harder, muffled groans panting through the blood, causing it to spray in spurts. I tried to grab her legs, but they flailed like a demonic acrobat. One sneaker caught me in the chest, and I reeled backward, wheezing. I was angry now. Fear and disbelief had taken their toll. Desperation peeled back civilization and left me only with my mammalian brain. I clenched my fist and slammed it into my friend's face. Ashley's head bucked and swung right back around toward me, screaming and sending flecks of blood at my face and chest. I struck her again, harder, letting out my own scream of frustration and rage. I felt my knuckles connect with her bony cheek. This time, she went limp, and Greg let her fall to the floor. "Nice one," he panted. I collapsed to one knee, trembling. I ran my hand through my hair, leaving behind my own blood and Ashley's. My ears still rang with her screams, as though they were echoing in my brain. But she had finally ceased her screaming. Now she lay upon the carpet, curled up in a ball, whimpering between gasping breaths. "Please, Mommy, don't let her get me. Please save me, Mommy. Mommy, help me. Where's Daddy, Mommy? Where did Daddy go? Don't leave me, Daddy. Please don't leave." And on it went. Should we get the police?" came Stacy's uncharacteristically meek voice. "And tell them what?" Greg asked callously. "Tell them what?" "Don't yell," Stacy hissed, a sharp edge to her voice. "Cool it," I barked. One more loud noise would have made me snap. "Kenny," I forced out softly. "Where's the bathroom?" When Kenny answered, I didn't recognize his voice. It was tiny, void of enthusiasm. "Second floor." "Let's get her up there. Clean her off, maybe." Greg and Kenny hefted Ashley to her feet and guided her out the door. Stacy followed. Before I left the room, I took a long, vindictive look at the statue. The patchwork of skin that clung to it had paled in color. I spat on the thing, partly because I longed to, but mostly for an experiment. The saliva hit her bulbous tits and began dripping down her body. It was ice before hitting her navel. The guys and I waited outside the bathroom door. Greg stood by the window. He had shoved the boards to the ground below, allowing a flood of pale moonlight to bathe the hallway. A fresh doobie dangled from his mouth, bouncing along for the twitchy ride his lips were on. I sat against the wall opposite Kenny, who was chewing his knuckles raw. I could tell he blamed himself for whatever happened downstairs. Truthfully, in a roundabout way, I blamed him too. The bathroom door swung open and Stacy marched out, slamming it shut behind her. Her hand snapped at Greg like a crazed pincer. "Gimme that shit." Greg relinquished the joint without hesitation, hastily pulling out another along with his lighter. Stacy plopped down beside me so hard she flinched. She then sucked away, dark eyes never leaving the bathroom door. "How is she?" Greg asked. We all thought it. Stacy was the one who spoke it. "What kind of retard question is that, Greg?" She took so long a drag her eyes pinched shut, and she coughed and hacked out the smoke. "Little cunt shit herself. That's how she's doing. Fucking reeks in there." "Show some sympathy," I growled. She turned on me with gritted teeth. "You want to go change her? Be my fucking guest, Captain Planet." "How's her arm?" She calmed down, took another hit. I tied her handkerchief around it. Kenny glanced sideways at the door like a lost child searching for his mother. "Is she safe alone?" "There's no knives or anything in there. Besides, she's just crying on the toilet now." Kenny wiped his nose against the back of his hand and choked sob escaped his lips. Stacy's mouth curled into a disgusted sneer. "You're crying now? Seriously?" "Shut up," was all Kenny choked out, hugging his chest as if it would fall from his body. His red eyes became angry, but they looked off down the hallway to hide the glint of their moisture. A twisting spiral of smoke floated past, glowing in the moonlight. I watched it sail by until it surrendered to the air and dissipated. My mind was happy to be focused on something mundane for a brief span. My face was on fire. I gingerly felt around the flesh until I found the peeling skin and wet blood. I could only imagine what Freddy Krueger victim I looked like. "What happened to her father?" I asked. The question hung in the air, along with the smoke, for a moment. "Left shortly after Ash was born," Greg said. Stacy turned to me with tired eyes, blowing lazy tendrils of smoke from her nostrils, like a stone dragon. "Why?" I let my head fall back against the wall. I felt specks of plaster and chipped paint rain down, where I'm sure they became caked to the blood in my hair. I was in no mood for caring. I was more taken with the split knuckles on my right hand, layered in Ashley's blood, as well as my own. Doesn't matter, I guess. I don't know how long we waited there, basking in lonely moonlight and sucking up an empty high. It could have been an hour, could have been 20 minutes. The only certainty is that eventually the pain in my ass outweighed the one in my soul, and I climbed like a drunken stick insect to my feet. I gave a soft knock on the bathroom door. "Ash? You good?" No answer. I knocked harder. Nothing. I opened the door and stepped in. It seems like horrific sights are always thought to be the basis for your nightmares the rest of your life. I disagree. If anything, what I saw that night set a new bar. Ever since, my nightmares have become child's play. Ashley's pants had been folded and placed neatly on the toilet, along with her purple, shit-stained underwear. Next to the toilet stood her shoes, perfectly symmetrical. Even the pink socks shoved into them seemed to mirror each other. Ashley stood at the sink. Her skin had gone a sickly white, contrasting vividly with the dark red blood that soaked her hands and legs. A pool of black red was spreading from where she stood, extending in spiderweb rivers through the cracks of the bathroom tiling. Stacy had been right. There were no knives in the bathroom, but Ashley had found scissors. I saw Ashley's eyes in the mirror. They were calm, serene. They showed no discernible sign of pain as she plopped a mass of dark red flesh into the sink. She smiled as she looked down at it. Spotting me in the mirror, she whirled to face me. The black void in her crotch, trimmed by sliced, dangling flesh, drooled in a steady trickle of black that splattered like rain into the yawning pool beneath her. "I think if I'm pure, she won't take me." Her voice was calm and dainty. A child's voice, if I ever heard one. Her head tilted as her steady eyes drilled into me. "Did you bring my daddy home?" The ambulance drove her away half an hour later. They had to strap her down in the gurney she was thrashing so violently, screaming piercing howls of unearthly terror into the night. The flashing red lights illuminated our pale faces as we watched every second. The police were told 4 different accounts of the same story, none of which they believed, of course. In the end, it was chalked up to a drug-induced insanity. The house was bulldozed a few months later. Last I heard, they're making plans to refurbish the entire area to make way for a new suburbia. Ashley's mother never spoke to us again. Frankly, she'd be a bitch if she had. We all graduated and went our own ways. Greg got a scholarship to play football at university, but he dropped out to marry and pop out 3 kids with his college sweetheart. Kenny joined the Navy, I suspect to get as far away as possible. Stacy I heard from the least. She went to 3 different colleges before calling it quits, I think to backpack across the East Coast with her whacked boyfriend. We all stayed in touch for a while, but life eventually isolated us as it tends to do. I went on to get my degree in physical science. Now I work as a teacher for a community college. Sure, my soul hurts, but the benefits are decent. 7 years after the event, I nursed a desire to reconnect with Ashley. It had been nagging at the back of my mind for some time. I had recently begun dating a woman with a wonderful little girl. I think my mind was harboring thoughts of family unity and other mushy crap. Tracking her down wasn't hard. The internet had come a long way since I was a kid. She was being treated in an institution upstate. Seemed more of a prison than a mental clinic. Security dotted the bright white hallways, and they cast me suspicious glances as I walked past. I carried with me an overpriced bouquet of dragon lilies. I'd forgotten many details, but not her favorite flower. I got as far as her room door before turning on my heel, jamming the flowers into a trash can, and walking out into the parking lot without so much as a glance behind me. Even through the industrial-strength door I had heard it. She was still screaming.